It all started on a bright Saturday morning, the kind of day that should have been peaceful. Birds chirped, the sun shone warmly, and I was sipping my coffee on the porch, enjoying the suburban dream. That was until I saw her, Karen, the new neighbor, the one who would turn my life into an absurd nightmare. She wasn't just any Karen. She was the Karen, the type who wielded HOA rules like a medieval warlord, a woman who could sniff out even the smallest violation and turn it into a full-blown scandal. And, unfortunately for me, I was her newest target. At first, I thought I had nothing to worry about. I'd lived in the neighborhood for years without a single issue. My house was well kept, my lawn trimmed, and I never caused trouble. But Karen didn't need a reason. She just needed control. She started small. A friendly note about my trash bins being out 10 minutes too long on collection day. A casual mention that my porch light wasn't HOA approved. Little things. But then she escalated. I still remember the exact moment I realized she was out to get me. I was pulling into my driveway after work, tired and ready to relax, only to find a giant orange cone blocking my driveway. Next to it stood Karen, arms crossed, smirking like a villain in a soap opera. I rolled down my window, baffled. "Excuse me, Karen, is there a reason you're blocking my driveway?" I asked. Her smirk widened. "Oh, I was just enforcing HOA regulations. Your driveway, according to the new guidelines, is not up to standard." I blinked. "What new guidelines?" She pulled out a printed HOA booklet, flipping to a page that suspiciously looked freshly stapled in. "As of last week's meeting, all driveways must adhere to the new aesthetic standards. Yours, unfortunately, does not." She motioned to my completely normal concrete driveway. I laughed, thinking she was joking. "Karen, my driveway has been here for years. Nobody has ever had a problem with it." She didn't budge. "Well, I do." That was the moment I realized she was serious. My jaw clenched, and I took a deep breath. "Okay, so what do I need to do?" She beamed, clearly enjoying this. "You need to submit a request for renovation and bring it up to HOA standards. Until then, you are not permitted to use it." I stared at her. "So where exactly am I supposed to park?" She shrugged. "That's not my problem. I should have seen it coming." She had been waiting for the perfect excuse to make my life miserable, and now she had it. The worst part? The HOA board was completely under her thumb. I attended the next meeting, hoping for some sense of reason, only to be met with blank stares and excessive nodding at everything Karen said. They voted unanimously to uphold the rule. Just like that, my driveway was off limits. For the next few days, I had to park blocks away, carrying groceries like a peasant while Karen sat on her porch sipping tea, watching me struggle. It wasn't just about the inconvenience. It was the principle. I knew that giving in would only make things worse. If she got away with this, what would be next? My mailbox? My front door color? I needed a plan. I tried reasoning with her one last time. I walked up to her porch, calm and composed. "Karen, let's be reasonable. My driveway isn't hurting anyone." She sighed dramatically. "Rules are rules. But they're ridiculous rules." She smiled sweetly. "Then maybe you should move." That was it. The final straw. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd play dirtier. My mind started racing with ideas. How could I bypass her absurd rule in a way that she couldn't stop? As I walked back to my house, something clicked. A loophole. A brilliant, ridiculous, and completely legal loophole. If Karen wanted to block my driveway, fine. I wouldn't need it. Instead, I would build something so outrageous, so undeniably clever, that it would not only solve my problem, but humiliate her in the process. I was going to build a private bridge over her house. Sitting in my living room that night, I went over the idea in my head again and again. A bridge. A private bridge that would go over Karen's house and connect directly to the street. It sounded crazy, insane even, but the more I thought about it, the more perfect it became. Karen had made it impossible for me to use my driveway, but she never said anything about the air above her house. If the HOA only regulated structures at ground level, then technically, I wasn't breaking any rules. I just had to figure out how to actually pull it off. The first thing I needed was expert advice. I called up my friend Jake, a civil engineer, and asked him the strangest question of his career. "Hey, how much would it cost to build a private bridge over someone's house?" There was silence on the other end for a long moment before he finally responded. "Are you messing with me?" I explained the situation, and once he stopped laughing, he actually seemed intrigued. "Okay, theoretically, it's possible. You'd need strong support beams, probably anchored on your property and extending over to the other side. If you use steel and concrete, it'll hold." "But dude, are you serious? I was more than serious. The more I imagined the look on Karen's face when she saw my car driving over her house, the more determined I became. I asked Jake to draw up a rough design, something simple but sturdy. He agreed, still half thinking I was joking. Meanwhile, I started researching HOA bylaws, looking for any clause that might ruin my plan. To my absolute delight, I found the perfect loophole. The HOA only regulated permanent structures built at ground level. This meant that as long as my bridge wasn't touching Karen's property, it was technically outside their jurisdiction. The next step was securing materials. I needed steel beams, concrete, and a whole lot of patience. To avoid suspicion, I ordered everything in small batches, telling the suppliers it was for a home renovation project. When the deliveries started arriving, Karen, always the nosy neighbor, asked what I was working on. I smiled and said, "Oh, just a little home improvement." She gave me a skeptical look but didn't press further. The real challenge was getting the necessary permits. Technically, I didn't need the HOA's permission since the bridge wouldn't be touching Karen's house, but I still needed city approval. I spent days filing paperwork, meeting with zoning officials, and making sure every legal box was checked. It was a long and tedious process, but eventually, I got the green light. I had the permits. The bridge was happening. Construction began, and it didn't take long for the entire neighborhood to notice. The first step was setting up the support beams on my property. Workers arrived with heavy machinery, drilling deep into the ground to create a solid foundation. The sound of construction filled the air, and Karen was the first to complain. She stormed over, demanding to know what was going on. "You can't just build whatever you want. This is an HOA community," she screeched. I calmly handed her a copy of my approved permits. "Actually, Karen, I can." She grabbed the papers, her eyes scanning them furiously. When she saw that everything was legal, her face turned red. This isn't right," she sputtered. "You can't do this." But she knew she was powerless to stop me. As the structure started taking shape, the neighbors began cheering me on. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had suffered under Karen's reign of terror. Nearly everyone had a horror story: ridiculous fines for tiny infractions, constant nitpicking, and absurdly strict rules. My bridge had become a symbol of rebellion, and people loved it. Some even brought out lawn chairs to watch the construction like it was some kind of reality show. Karen, on the other hand, was losing her mind. She tried everything to stop me. She filed complaints with the HOA, but they couldn't do anything since my bridge wasn't violating any of their rules. She called the city, but the permits were already approved. She even tried to intimidate the construction workers, but they just ignored her. Every time she ran out onto her lawn, arms flailing, screaming about how this was unacceptable, I couldn't help but smile. One evening, as I stood on my partially completed bridge overlooking her house, I realized just how perfect my plan was. The bridge cast a shadow over her roof, a constant reminder of her failure. Even if she somehow convinced the HOA to change the rules, it would be too late. My bridge was here to stay. Karen's desperation only grew. She started spreading rumors that the bridge was unsafe, that it would collapse and destroy her home. She told everyone I was a danger to the community, but no one listened. The neighborhood had turned against her, and she knew it. Her once powerful grip over the HOA was slipping. By the time the final steel reinforcements were put in place, the bridge was an undeniable masterpiece. It wasn't just functional, it was a statement, a symbol of standing up against ridiculous authority. I ran my hands over the smooth concrete, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Karen had tried to block my driveway, to control my life, but all she had done was push me to outsmart her. The night before the grand reveal, I parked my car a few blocks away and walked up to the bridge. It was a surreal moment, standing on a structure I had built purely out of spite. I looked down at Karen's house, imagining the meltdown she would have when she saw me driving over it for the first time. This was going to be legendary. When morning came, I got into my car, took a deep breath, and slowly drove onto the bridge. As I reached the top, I saw Karen standing on her lawn, mouth open in shock. Her face turned from disbelief to fury as I honked my horn and waved. The bridge worked perfectly, a smooth ride over her house and straight to the main road. I had done it. I had beaten her, but I knew Karen wouldn't give up that easily. She was already dialing numbers, probably calling every authority she could think of. What she didn't know was that I had already planned for this. She could fight all she wanted, but she would never win. The war wasn't over yet, but I had just won the biggest battle. The moment my tires touched the bridge, I felt a rush of triumph. The smooth ride, the perfect incline, the seamless transition from my property to the main road, it all worked exactly as I had envisioned. But the real reward was the look on Karen's face. Standing below in her pristine, over-manicured yard, she stared up at me with a mix of disbelief and unfiltered rage. Her mouth hung open, her eyes twitching, her fingers clenched into fists. She was witnessing the impossible, something she had never even considered as a possibility. I had completely bypassed her ridiculous blockade. I tapped my horn twice, just for effect, and gave her a little wave as I drove over her house. The moment I passed the bridge's exit and reached the road, I could already see her scrambling toward her phone, fingers jabbing furiously at the screen. It was obvious she was calling someone. The HOA, the city, the police, anyone who would listen. I smiled to myself. Let her try. I had covered every legal loophole, every angle she could possibly attack. This wasn't just a win, it was a checkmate. That afternoon, as I parked back in my driveway using my brand new elevated road, a group of neighbors had gathered nearby, watching with curiosity and thinly veiled amusement. A few of them clapped as I stepped out of my car. "Unbelievable," said Mr. Thompson from next door, shaking his head with a grin. "I never thought I'd live to see someone outsmart that woman. You're a legend." Another neighbor chuckled. "Karen's probably combusting inside her house right now." I laughed and shrugged. She asked for it. Of course, it didn't take long for Karen to show up again. Less than an hour after my return, she stormed over, HOA rule book in one hand, phone in the other. Her face was bright red, her breath coming in sharp bursts. She looked like she had just run a marathon fueled entirely by rage. "This is a violation of HOA regulations," she screeched, shaking the booklet at me. I crossed my arms and leaned against my car, feigning confusion. "Oh, which regulation exactly?" She flipped through the pages at lightning speed, searching for something, anything that could back her up. But we both knew she wouldn't find it. Finally, she stopped, stabbing her finger at a section. "No permanent structures can extend beyond the owner's property." I nodded slowly. "Right. And my bridge doesn't. The supports are on my property. The structure itself is elevated and does not physically touch yours. It's suspended airspace." She let out a frustrated growl. "You can't just build things over people's houses. That's not how this works." I grinned. "Actually, it is. I checked with the city. They approved the permit. You should have gotten the notification." Her eyes widened slightly. "Notification?" I pulled out my own copy of the approval notice from the city's zoning board. "They sent notices to the HOA board weeks ago. You were on the recipient list. Didn't check your emails, Karen?" Her face went through a fascinating transformation from anger to realization, then back to anger. "This is an eyesore. It's bringing down property values. It's a nuisance." "Funny," I said, rubbing my chin. "I think it actually increases the value. Private access roads are highly desirable." She was trembling now, her frustration hitting critical mass. "This isn't over. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting." "Knock yourself out," I said, giving her a cheerful thumbs up. She stormed off, muttering under her breath, and I knew this was far from finished. Karen wasn't the type to let things go. She was plotting her next move before she even made it back to her front porch. Sure enough, within 2 days, HOA board members started coming by one after another, each trying a different angle to convince me to take down the bridge. First, it was the "let's be reasonable" approach. Mr. Jenkins, the HOA president, knocked on my door with a forced smile and a clipboard. "We understand there's been some tension," he said smoothly. "Perhaps we can find a compromise." I raised an eyebrow. "Compromise? You mean like when I asked for a reasonable solution to my driveway and was ignored?" "Well," he cleared his throat, "rules are rules. And my bridge follows every single one." His smile twitched. "Yes, but..." I held up my hand. "No buts. If the HOA had worked with me instead of letting Karen run wild, none of this would have been necessary. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do." The next attempt was intimidation. A group of board members showed up with an official-looking document claiming I was in violation of a revised HOA bylaw. "This regulation was just passed," Karen said smugly. "It clearly states that no homeowner can construct an overhead structure that extends beyond 12 feet in height." I took the document, skimmed it, and then laughed. "Nice try, but you can't enforce a rule retroactively. My bridge was approved before this was even written." Karen's smirk faltered, but she crossed her arms. "Then we'll challenge it in court." "Go ahead," I said, leaning against my railing. "I'll be happy to countersue for harassment." That was the moment Karen realized she was backed into a corner. She had tried every trick in the book, and none of them had worked. But she wasn't done yet. I could see it in her eyes. She was planning something desperate. The following night, I heard strange noises outside, a faint metallic clanking, the sound of something scraping against concrete. I peered out my window and caught a glimpse of movement near the bridge. My stomach clenched. Karen wouldn't, would she? I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, moving quietly toward the source of the noise. As I rounded the corner, I froze. There, crouched near one of the support beams, was Karen. In her hands was a wrench, and she was frantically unscrewing one of the bolts. She was trying to sabotage the bridge. I flicked on the flashlight, and the beam landed directly on her. She flinched, dropping the wrench with a loud clatter. Her face went pale, then bright red. "Karen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She straightened, struggling to regain her composure. "I was inspecting it for safety violations." I gestured at the wrench on the ground. With that, she opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no excuse. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. "I think the HOA will be interested in this. Or maybe the police. Pretty sure this counts as vandalism." She took a step back, her expression twisting into something desperate. "You wouldn't." I smiled. "Try me." She turned and bolted, disappearing into her house. I shook my head, picking up the wrench she had left behind. Karen had lost. She just didn't know it yet. The bridge stood strong, and now, with proof of her sabotage attempt, I had even more leverage against her. She had declared war, but I was the one writing the rules now. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Karen's voice screeching from across the street. It was so loud I could hear it through my closed windows. I walked out onto my porch with my coffee in hand, watching as she waved her arms wildly at a few HOA board members who had gathered in front of her house. Her frustration was practically radiating off her in waves. It was clear that last night's failure had only made her angrier. I smirked, knowing she was probably cooking up another ridiculous plan to take me down. By noon, I got my answer. A letter was taped to my front door, the official HOA letterhead stamped at the top. "Urgent notice. HOA board meeting tonight. Subject, unauthorized bridge construction." I chuckled, crumpling the paper in my hand. They were really going for it. Karen had managed to convince the board to take one last desperate swing at stopping me. It was almost cute. Almost. That evening, I walked into the HOA meeting expecting the usual nonsense. The community center was packed, neighbors whispering to each other as I took a seat near the front. Karen sat at the head of the table, looking smug as ever. The moment the meeting was called to order, she cleared her throat dramatically. "We are gathered here tonight to address a severe violation of our HOA regulations," she began, her voice dripping with fake authority. "The homeowner at 322 Maple Drive has constructed an unsanctioned, unsightly, and highly disruptive structure that is damaging the integrity of our neighborhood." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "You mean my bridge?" Karen shot me a glare. "Yes, that monstrosity." I nodded. "The bridge that was approved by the city and doesn't break a single HOA rule." She gritted her teeth, clearly not expecting me to push back so quickly. "Well, the HOA has recently passed a new bylaw," she announced, pulling out a freshly printed document. "As of today, no homeowner may construct an overhead structure that exceeds 12 feet in height." I took the paper from her hands and skimmed it. Then I laughed. "Cute, but you can't enforce a rule retroactively. My bridge was completed before this rule existed." Karen's face turned red. "The board can vote to have it removed regardless." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? And what legal grounds do you have for that?" Silence filled the room. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, none of them willing to meet my gaze. They knew Karen had nothing. Then she tried another angle. "The bridge is bringing down property values. Several neighbors have complained." That's when Mrs. Dorson, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, stood up. "Actually, I think the bridge is wonderful." Karen snapped her head around. "What?" Mrs. Dorson adjusted her glasses. "It's innovative, shows creativity, and to be honest, I'm tired of you enforcing ridiculous rules just because you can." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Karen's face twisted in disbelief as more neighbors began nodding. I saw Mr. Thompson smirking in the back. Even some of the board members looked like they regretted showing up. Karen's voice rose, defensive. "This is about maintaining order. We can't just let people build whatever they want." I shrugged. "Seems like the neighborhood disagrees." Her jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might shatter. For the first time, she realized she was losing control. But Karen wasn't one to go down quietly. The next morning, I saw her outside making phone calls. I had a feeling she wasn't just complaining to the HOA anymore. She was going higher. That suspicion was confirmed when a city inspector showed up at my door later that afternoon. The man introduced himself politely and said there had been a complaint regarding structural safety. I wasn't surprised. Karen had finally pulled out the big guns. I led him to the bridge, watching as he carefully examined the foundation, the beams, and the incline. He even took notes. After nearly an hour of checking every possible angle, he turned to me and said, "Everything looks fine." I smiled. "So, no violations?" "None at all," he confirmed. "Whoever built this did a solid job." From across the street, Karen had been watching the entire time. When she saw the inspector shake my hand and leave without issuing any orders, she let out a strangled noise of frustration and stormed back inside. I figured that would be the end of it, but I underestimated just how petty Karen could be. That night, I was sitting in my living room when I heard rustling outside. I checked the security cameras on my phone and immediately groaned. Karen was back, and this time she wasn't alone. A group of 3 men stood near the base of my bridge, one of them holding what looked like a crowbar. She was trying to destroy it. I grabbed my phone, dialing the police as I headed outside. The moment I stepped onto my porch, flashlight in hand, Karen froze. The men with her hesitated, clearly unsure if they wanted to continue. "Karen," I called out, my voice calm but firm. "This is getting embarrassing." She whirled around, her face twisted with fury. "You have no right to build this monstrosity." I held up my phone. "And you have no right to vandalize my property. That's illegal, by the way." The men with her exchanged nervous glances, realizing they had made a mistake. One of them muttered something under his breath and started walking away. The others followed. Karen was left standing alone, humiliated. I smirked. "You really thought this would work?" Her face contorted with rage, and she pointed a shaking finger at me. "I will find a way to bring that thing down." I sighed, shaking my head. "You've already lost, Karen. Just let it go." She turned and stomped back to her house, slamming the door so hard that it rattled. The police arrived a few minutes later. I showed them the footage, explaining the situation. They took a report and warned Karen that any further attempts to damage my property would result in criminal charges. For the first time since this whole ordeal started, Karen looked genuinely shaken. The realization was finally hitting her. She wasn't untouchable. The next few days were blissfully quiet. The HOA stopped trying to fight me. The neighbors stopped caring about the bridge and went on with their lives. Even Karen, though still fuming, seemed to have retreated for the time being. But I knew she wasn't done. Someone like Karen never truly gives up. She was waiting, watching, planning her next move, and I would be ready for it. The days following Karen's failed sabotage attempt were oddly peaceful. For the first time in weeks, there were no surprise HOA notices, no sudden rule changes, no desperate attempts to tear down my bridge. The neighborhood had settled into an eerie quiet, almost as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She was planning something. She always was. I didn't have to wait long to find out what it was. One morning, I woke up to an email from the HOA board announcing a mandatory emergency meeting. The subject line alone told me everything I needed to know. Discussion on unauthorized structures and legal actions. I chuckled as I sipped my coffee. Karen must have been working overtime to convince the board that they still had a shot at getting rid of my bridge. It was almost impressive how much energy she was putting into something so futile. When I arrived at the meeting that evening, the tension in the room was thick. Karen sat at the head of the table, her expression smug, her arms folded as if she had already won. The other board members looked less confident, but they were clearly still entertaining her demands. The moment the meeting started, she launched into another dramatic speech. "We, as a community, cannot stand by while a single homeowner disregards the rules that make this neighborhood what it is," she declared, her voice filled with self-importance. "This bridge is a blight on our streets, a direct challenge to our authority, and it must be removed immediately." I leaned back in my chair, unimpressed. "Still going with that argument, huh?" I asked, my tone deliberately casual. "Didn't we already establish that my bridge is legal?" Karen's eye twitched, but she pressed on. "The HOA has decided to escalate the matter. We are filing an official lawsuit against you." A murmur rippled through the room. Even some of the board members looked surprised. I arched an eyebrow. "A lawsuit? On what grounds?" Karen sat up straighter, clearly thrilled to be the one delivering the so-called bad news. "Your bridge, while not in direct violation of past HOA bylaws, is now in violation of newly enacted regulations. We have consulted with legal counsel, and we will be pursuing action to have it forcibly removed." I fought back a smile. "Oh, and which lawyer did you consult?" She smirked. "That's confidential." Of course, it was. Because she was bluffing. I had already spoken to an actual lawyer, one who assured me that the HOA had no legal standing to enforce rules retroactively. If they took me to court, they would lose, and they would lose badly. But I decided to let her play out her fantasy for a little longer. All right, I said with a shrug. Go ahead. File your lawsuit. Karen's smirk faltered slightly. Excuse me. I crossed my arms. You're so confident that you'll win, so do it. Take me to court. Let's see how that works out for you. For a moment, she seemed genuinely thrown off. She had been expecting a reaction. Anger, panic, maybe even desperation. Instead, I was calling her bluff right in front of the entire HOA. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then forced another smile. We will be moving forward with legal action soon. I nodded. Good. Be sure to send me the paperwork when you actually get a lawyer. The meeting ended with no real resolution. Karen stormed off before anyone could question her further, and I walked out knowing that she had just played her last card and failed. But Karen wasn't just persistent, she was also reckless, and she was about to make the biggest mistake of all. That night, I decided to check my security cameras again. After her last failed attempt at sabotage, I had installed extra cameras around the bridge, just in case. And it was a good thing I did. At around midnight, movement triggered the sensors. I tapped the feed on my phone, and what I saw made me shake my head in disbelief. Karen was back, but this time she had brought tools. I watched as she crept toward the bridge's support beams, gripping what looked like large bolt cutters. She moved quickly, glancing around as if expecting someone to catch her. The camera's night vision caught every detail, the way her hands trembled with frustration, the determined glint in her eyes. She wasn't just vandalizing my property this time. She was actively trying to bring the bridge down. I didn't hesitate. I called the police. It didn't take long for them to arrive. By the time the officers pulled up, Karen was still struggling to break through the reinforced steel locks that held the structure together. The moment she saw the flashing red and blue lights, she froze, her face twisting in horror. One of the officers stepped out of the car and shined a flashlight directly on her. "Ma'am, step away from the structure," the officer ordered. Karen spun around, dropping the bolt cutters. This is my neighborhood. I have the right to." "No, you don't," I said as I walked out onto my porch, arms crossed. "That's my private property, and you just got caught trying to destroy it." The officers wasted no time placing her in handcuffs. She shrieked and tried to argue, but the evidence was undeniable. The security footage, the tools in her hands, the clear intent. It was all there. As she was led to the police car, she shot me a look of pure hatred. "You haven't won," she spat. I smiled. "I think I have." Karen was charged with trespassing and attempted property damage. The HOA, desperate to save face, immediately distanced themselves from her. Within days, she was removed from the board entirely. The once powerful Karen, the woman who had terrorized the neighborhood with her ridiculous rules and power-hungry antics, was suddenly just another homeowner, one with a criminal record, no authority, and no allies. Word spread fast. The neighbors who had once feared her now openly mocked her. Her house, once the pristine centerpiece of the block, became a silent reminder of her downfall. She stopped attending HOA meetings. She stopped enforcing petty rules. It was as if she had simply given up. And then, a few weeks later, a moving truck appeared in front of her house. Karen was gone by the end of the month. No one knew exactly where she went, and no one cared. The neighborhood, finally free from her reign of terror, felt lighter, more relaxed. People started putting up decorations without fear of fines. Lawn chairs appeared in driveways again. It was as if the entire community had been holding its breath, and now they could finally exhale. As for me, I enjoyed every second of my victory. My bridge stood tall, untouched, a symbol of what happens when you refuse to let petty tyrants win. I had gone up against the most stubborn, rule-obsessed HOA Karen in existence, and I had beaten her at her own game. One afternoon, I sat on my porch with a cold drink in hand, watching as life in the neighborhood carried on without her. Mr. Thompson walked by and gave me a nod. "Hell of a fight you put up," he said. I grinned. "Worth every second." He chuckled. "So what's next? Building a private toll booth?" I laughed and took a sip of my drink. "Nah," I said. "I think I'll just enjoy the view."